According to the National Alliance of Mental Illness, a mental disease will be diagnosed in more than half of all Americans at some point of their lives. However, not everyone will be assisted, and just 40% of adults and 50% of youth receive treatment they require. Even though mental illness is widespread and may impact anybody, it still carries a significant stigma. This stigma makes people hesitant to seek help and be ashamed to do so. Accepting and understanding of mental diseases have come a long way, but there's still room for growth. There are still many myths about mental health. Let's address some of the myths I found on the website of the National Alliance on Mental Illness. One of the myths is that children don't experience mental health problems. In fact, half of mental health disorders show first signs before a person turns age 14, and 3/4 of mental disorders begin before age 24. Another myth is that people with mental health problems can just snap out of it if they try really, really hard. But the fact is that mental health problems have nothing to do with being lazy or weak, and many people need help to get better. Another myth is that there is no hope for people with mental health problems. But studies show that people with mental health problems get better and many recover completely. According to an article by the US National Library of Medicine, trephination is a surgical procedure in which a hole is created on the skull by removing a circular piece of a bone. This procedure is one of the oldest documented surgical procedures performed by men. But in the 18th and early 19th century, this procedure was used on the mentally ill and believed that through this opening, the evil thought to be inhabiting one's head and causing their psychopathology would be released and the individual would be cured. Nowadays, a similar procedure is done called the burr hole, which according to an article by Healthline is an emergency procedure resulting of traumatic injuries and is used to relieve pressure on the brain. An article by Concordia University states that trephination dates back to the earliest days of history of mental health treatments. This practice began around 7,000 years ago and is likely to be performed when you have headaches or mental illness, and it's even believed to release of demonic possessions. This article continues by saying that prehistoric cultures often held a supernatural view of not what we know now as mental health, and saw it as the work of evil spirits, demons, gods, or witches who took control of that person. Even though many people believe that mental illness had to do with demonic practices, today I want to commemorate someone that thought the opposite and helped mental health become what it is now. His name is Philippe Pinel. He was one of the first people who stood up for what was right and saw mentally ill people as human beings. Philippe Pinel took a biomechanical approach to treat mentally ill and created modern psychiatry, challenging the popular belief that mental illness is a result of demonic possessions, and concluded that it was a result of the environmental and social stressors. Philippe Pinel did not start his career in psychiatry. According to a biography by Salem Encyclopedia of Health, Philippe Pinel was born in a small village of southwestern France. His father was a surgeon, and he came from a family of physicians through his mother. But he wanted to do something different, so he earned his degree of Master's in Arts of Mathematics in 1767. 6 years later, he realized that he needed to continue his family's legacy, and he switched his career by receiving an MD in 1773. The French Revolution also helped Pinel become closer to what his goals will later become. The French Revolution helped Pinel's career when the French monarchy was abolished in 1792. And in the following year, in January 1793, Pinel was one of the doctors required to attend the execution of King Louis XVI and an experience that horrified him. According to an article by Louis Charland, this French Revolution actually helped his career, and he was sent off to Paris to become one of the leaders of the Psychiatry Hospital for Men. Then in 1795, he became a leader of a much larger hospital for women, helping him become perhaps one of the most famous advocates for humanitarian reforms at the time. In fact, there is a painting by Tony Robert Fleury of Philippe Pinel releasing women from their chains at the Salpêgue Asylum in Paris in 1795. In an article by Washington State University on the history of mental illness, his leadership led him to be appointed chief physician at a mental asylum. At the time, mental patients were subjected to horrible conditions and questionable treatments, such as patients being chained like animals, giving them ice water baths, and submitting them to isolation. And sometimes even the opposite, by ridiculing them, patients, by placing them in public display, therefore making it a tourist attraction, with sightseers paying a penny to view the more violent patients. Philippe Pinel saw these patients as being ill and not possessed. Physicians are used to prescribing medicine and treatments based on the diagnosis of your illness. But in an article named Fleeing the Insane by the American Journal of Public Health, Philippe Pinel developed specific techniques and argued that psychological treatment included therapeutic conversation and was pushing forward the ideas of the treatments to be tailored to each individual, therefore needing to understand the person's history and perspectives on their own life. Trephination is one of the many inhumane practices used on the mentally ill in the late 1700s. Pinel was one of the first to recognize and advocate for mentally ill people. These patients, according to Philippe Pinel, are sick and unpossessed. In an article by Miguel Faria, some of Pinel's personal achievements are mentioned. Pinel stopped using the remedies like bloodletting, which consists of a piece of wood that will open a vein, causing the blood to flow out into a waiting container. This practice, although used for 3,000 years, discovered no clinical support. He visited his patients daily, taking them on one-on-one, observing their behaviors, building case files for each person. He also gathered evidence from large number of cases in order to rationalize mental illness, understand its causes, and devise effective therapies. He helped to abolish the public who would pay to come and laugh and ridicule or disturb the mentally ill at the asylums. Philippe Pinel and other prominent personalities transformed the world's perspective on mental diseases, restoring community and justice for patients. Despite their delayed start, Pinel's efforts saved innumerable lives and influenced how we address mental illness today. The treatment of mental ill people would never change if people like Philippe Pinel didn't exist. Quote, "The insane are sick people whose unhappy state deserves all of the sympathy and its own suffering humanity." End quote. These are the words of Philippe Pinel, also known as the father of modern psychiatry. Philippe Pinel was a French physician that developed what we know now as moral therapy. Today, I want to commemorate Philippe Pinel and all his work that ultimately helps society understand mental illness. But most importantly, that there is still so much more work to do. Today, mental health is finally making its way into conversations, leading to so many preventable tragedies. Thank you.